the setting sun and whispers of war. The last light of day settles across the Himalayan foothills like honey poured over ancient stone. From where our unnamed soldier sits on a weathered outcrop near the Ledo Road, the mountains rise in endless waves of blue and purple, their peaks catching the final golden rays before surrendering to twilight. The air carries the scent of wild jasmine and distant wood smoke, the kind of evening that makes a man forget, for just a moment, that the world has gone mad with war. He adjusts his worn field jacket and pulls out a letter from home, its edges soft from repeated handling. The paper crackles gently in the mountain breeze as he unfolds it, though he knows every word by heart. His wife's careful handwriting speaks of victory gardens and rationing, of their neighbors' boys shipping out to Europe, of a world that seems impossibly far from this remote corner of Burma. But distance, as he's learning, means nothing in this war. Just 18 months ago, he was managing inventory at a textile mill in Ohio. His biggest concern, whether the spring cotton shipments would arrive on schedule. Now he wears the patch of Merrill's Marauders, one of 3,000 volunteers selected for what the brass calls a hazardous mission behind enemy lines. The transformation still feels surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold through thick glass. The mountains before him have witnessed empires rise and fall. British colonial administrators once traveled these same valleys, establishing the rhythms of trade and governance that seemed as permanent as the peaks themselves. Tea plantations dotted the hillsides, their neat rows of bushes tended by generations of workers who knew every stone and stream. The Burma Road carried supplies and dreams northward into China, a lifeline that connected ancient civilizations to modern commerce. All of that changed on a quiet Sunday morning in December. He remembers exactly where he was when the news broke about Pearl Harbor. Standing in his kitchen, coffee growing cold in his hand, listening to the radio announcer's voice crack with the weight of what he was reporting. 2,400 Americans dead, the Pacific Fleet burning in Hawaiian waters, a coordinated attack that demonstrated planning, precision, and a strategic vision that caught America's military leadership completely off guard. The Japanese had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone in Washington wanted to admit. While American diplomats pursued negotiations in good faith, Japanese naval commanders were already rehearsing the attack in secluded bays, their pilots practicing low-level bombing runs until they could execute them blindfolded. The element of surprise wasn't just tactical, it was philosophical. Two nations operating from entirely different assumptions about honor, negotiation, and the nature of conflict itself. Within hours of Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces began their southern advance. Not the slow, grinding campaign that European warfare had become, but something entirely different. Lightning strikes across vast distances. Coordinated amphibious assaults that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The conquest of Hong Kong, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, each victory building momentum for the next. Burma fell into Japanese hands with a speed that stunned even their own commanders. Our marauder shifts position on the rocky ledge, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The tactical brilliance of the Japanese advance still amazes him, even as he prepares to fight against it. They understood something that the Western powers had missed. That modern warfare in the Pacific would be won not by the side with the strongest fortifications, but by the side that could move fastest across the most difficult terrain. The Burma campaign began as a sideshow, a secondary theater that few Americans could even locate on a map. But geography has its own logic, and Burma's position made it the keystone of Japanese strategy in Southeast Asia. Control Burma, and you control the last supply route to Chiang Kai-shek's forces in China. Control Burma, and you have a launching pad for potential operations against India itself. Most importantly, control Burma, and you deny the Allies any hope of mounting an effective counter-offensive in the region. General Joseph Stilwell understood this perhaps better than anyone in the Allied command structure. Stilwell, known to his men as Vinegar Joe for his acidic personality and uncompromising standards, had spent years in China before the war. He spoke Mandarin fluently and understood Chinese military culture in ways that most Western officers never would. When the Japanese cut the Burma Road in early 1942, Stilwell took it personally. The strategic situation was elegantly simple and impossibly complex. Simple because the objective was clear: reopen the land route to China and deny Japan the resources of Southeast Asia. Complex, because achieving that objective required coordinating British, American, Chinese, and various indigenous forces across some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. Mountains that rose 15,000 feet. Jungles so thick that artillery pieces disappeared into the undergrowth. Monsoon seasons that turned dirt roads into impassable rivers of mud. Traditional military doctrine had little to say about such conditions. Our soldier folds the letter carefully and returns it to his breast pocket, feeling the weight of the moment settling around him like the mountain air itself. Tomorrow, he and his fellow marauders will begin their movement toward the Hukaong Valley, where Japanese forces have established defensive positions that conventional attacks cannot break. The mission briefings speak in clinical terms about deep penetration tactics and disruption of enemy supply lines. But everyone understands the reality beneath the euphemisms. They're being asked to do what no American unit has ever done before, to match the Japanese at their own game of rapid movement through impossible terrain, to become ghosts in the jungle, striking where the enemy least expects and vanishing before reinforcements can arrive, to prove that American soldiers can adapt to any environment, master any challenge, overcome any obstacle through superior training and unbreakable will. The irony isn't lost on him that they're using Japanese tactics to fight the Japanese. Merrill's Marauders represent something new in American military thinking, a recognition that this war will require not just industrial might and technological superiority, but a fundamental reimagining of how soldiers fight. The European theater, for all its complexity, still resembles warfare as traditionally understood. Armies face each other across defined lines. Territory changes hands through coordinated offensives supported by massive artillery barrages and air power. Burma offers no such clarity. Here, victory belongs to the side that can endure the longest march, survive on the fewest supplies, and maintain cohesion when every instinct screams to scatter and hide. The jungle doesn't care about rank or nationality. It tests every man equally, stripping away everything except the core question of whether he can continue moving forward when his body demands rest and his mind craves the comfort of familiar routines. The Japanese learned this lesson early, building their entire Southeast Asian strategy around small, highly mobile units that could live off the land and strike without warning. Their soldiers carried rice instead of canned rations, moved at night instead of day, and treated the jungle as an ally rather than an enemy. When British and American commanders finally grasped the implications of this approach, they faced an uncomfortable truth. Matching Japanese tactics would require creating Japanese-style units. Hence the Marauders. A cool breeze stirs the rhododendron bushes below his perch, carrying with it the complex perfume of a landscape that has known peace for so long that war still feels like an intrusion rather than an inevitability. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird calls across the valley, its voice pure and haunting in the gathering darkness. These mountains have their own timeline, measured in geological epochs rather than human conflicts. What seems monumentally important to the men who fight and die in these valleys barely registers as a footnote in the longer story of stone and sky. Yet for all its timeless beauty, this landscape now serves as a chessboard where great powers maneuver for advantage. Every ridgeline represents a potential defensive position. Every river crossing becomes a strategic choke point. Every village transforms into either a source of intelligence or a security risk, depending on the loyalties of its inhabitants and the tactical situation of the moment. The complexity of operating in Burma extends far beyond simple military considerations. This is a land where British colonial administrators, Chinese nationalist forces, American advisors, and various ethnic minorities all pursue overlapping but not identical objectives, where today's ally might become tomorrow's obstacle, and where local knowledge often matters more than sophisticated equipment or superior firepower. Our marauder has spent months studying maps of the region, memorizing the names of rivers and mountain passes that most Americans will never hear of. The Irrawaddy, flowing north to south like a liquid spine through the heart of the country. The Chindwin, marking the boundary between British India and what was once the independent kingdom of Burma. The Salween, cutting deep gorges through terrain so rugged that entire armies can disappear into its folds without a trace. These aren't just geographical features, they're the infrastructure of a campaign that will test every assumption about what American soldiers can accomplish when pushed beyond their theoretical limits. The men of Merrill's Marauders carry no illusions about the nature of their mission. They've volunteered for something unprecedented, something that exists at the intersection of military necessity and calculated desperation. As full darkness settles over the mountains, he can see the lights of the base camp twinkling in the valley below. His fellow marauders are completing their final preparations, checking equipment that must function perfectly in conditions that would destroy lesser gear, canvas that won't rot in 100% humidity, weapons that won't jam when clogged with mud and vegetation, medical supplies that might mean the difference between life and death when the nearest hospital is 300 miles away through enemy territory. The weight of what they're attempting settles on his shoulders like the mountain air itself, heavy with possibility and consequence. Somewhere beyond those darkened ridges, Japanese forces are making their own preparations, confident in their mastery of jungle warfare and their string of victories that stretches from Pearl Harbor to the gates of India. But wars aren't won by past victories. They're won by the side that adapts most quickly to changing circumstances. And tomorrow, the adaptation begins. Hacked into the emerald depths. The first step into the jungle feels like entering another world entirely. The temperature rises 10 degrees in the span of 3 paces. The air becomes thick, almost chewy with moisture. Our marauder adjusts his pack straps, feeling the weight of 60 pounds of equipment settle against his shoulders, and takes his first real breath of Burma. It tastes green, that's the only way to describe it, a flavor of chlorophyll and decay, of life growing so fast you can almost hear it stretching toward the canopy. The jungle doesn't simply exist here, it dominates. Every surface drips with condensation, every shadow holds the promise of something unseen. The very air seems alive, buzzing with insects whose names no American has ever learned. Behind him, the familiar sounds of the staging area fade into memory. The clatter of mess kits, the rumble of truck engines, the comfortable chatter of soldiers preparing for deployment, all of it swallowed by this green cathedral that stretches endlessly ahead. The transition is so complete, it feels like stepping through a portal into a different century. The catch-in guide assigned to their unit moves with a fluid grace that makes every American step seem clumsy by comparison. Maung Tin is his name, though the pronunciation still eludes most of the squad. He's perhaps 40 years old, though the jungle has weathered his face in ways that make precise age impossible to determine. His feet, bare except for simple woven sandals, find purchase on surfaces that would send a combat boot sliding into the undergrowth. What strikes our marauder most profoundly is the guide's relationship with this environment. Where the Americans push through the jungle, Maung Tin flows with it. He reads the forest like a familiar book, noting the bent branch that indicates recent passage, the particular call of a bird that signals all clear, the subtle shift in vegetation that marks the presence of water ahead. The Kachin people have been fighting the Japanese since the invasion began. Their villages burned, their families scattered. They've maintained a guerrilla resistance that has frustrated Japanese commanders for months. Now they've thrown their lot in with these strange Americans who've come so far to fight in their homeland. The alliance is born of necessity, but it's growing into something deeper, a mutual respect forged in the crucible of shared danger. Maung Tin pauses at what appears to be an impenetrable wall of vines and bamboo. To untrained eyes, it's simply more jungle. But he's reading signs invisible to the Americans, the way certain leaves have been disturbed, the pattern of broken twigs, the faint depression in the earth that might be a footprint or might be nothing at all. After a moment's consideration, he adjusts their route slightly eastward. The heat builds as the morning progresses. It's not the dry heat of a desert, which at least allows sweat to evaporate and provide some cooling. This is a wet heat that clings like a second skin, moisture rising from the jungle floor to meet moisture falling from the canopy above. Within an hour, every piece of clothing is soaked through. Within 2 hours, the distinction between sweat and condensation becomes meaningless. Our marauder discovers that the jungle has its own rhythm, its own rules of engagement. The first rule is patience. Rushing leads to exhaustion, Exhaustion leads to mistakes, and mistakes in this environment can be fatal. The second rule is observation. Every sound has meaning. The sudden silence of insects might indicate a predator, or it might indicate Japanese patrol. The third rule is humility. The jungle doesn't care about American industrial might or strategic bombing campaigns. Here, survival depends on adaptation to an environment that has been perfecting its defenses for millions of years. The trail, such as it is, winds through terrain that shifts character every few hundred yards. Dense bamboo groves give way to sections where massive trees create a canopy so thick that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. Streams appear without warning, their banks treacherous with mud that can swallow a boot to the ankle. Fallen logs, some as wide as city streets, create natural bridges across ravines whose depths disappear into green shadows. The sounds of the jungle begin to sort themselves into categories. There's the constant background hum of insects, a white noise that becomes oddly comforting in its consistency. The drip of condensation creates an irregular percussion, water falling from leaf to leaf in a cascade that never quite develops a predictable pattern. Bird calls echo through the canopy, some melodious, others harsh and guttural. And underneath it all, the subtle creaking of wood under pressure. Trees swaying in breezes that never reach the forest floor. Bamboo stalks rubbing against each other in a whispered conversation. But it's the sudden silences that command attention. When the insect chorus stops abruptly, when the bird calls cease, when even the dripping seems to pause, those moments demand immediate alertness. In the jungle, silence often means danger. The importance of their mission weighs heavily in the humid air. The Burma Road, that vital supply line that once carried materials to Chinese forces fighting the Japanese, remains severed. Every day it stays closed. Chinese resistance weakens. Every week of Japanese control over Burma brings enemy forces closer to India, closer to linking up with German advances in the Middle East, closer to completing a ring of conquest that could strangle Allied hopes in the Pacific. The strategic mathematics are stark. China, with its inexhaustible manpower but desperate need for modern weapons, depends entirely on external supply lines. The Japanese conquest of Burma closed the primary route. The alternative, flying supplies over the Himalayas, can deliver only a fraction of what's needed. Reopening the Burma Road isn't just a tactical objective, it's essential to preventing the collapse of Chinese resistance and the subsequent freeing of millions of Japanese troops for deployment elsewhere. Our Marauders pack seems to grow heavier with each mile. The weight distribution that felt reasonable in training now creates pressure points that will become serious problems if not addressed. He adjusts straps, redistributes equipment, and learns the first of many lessons about jungle warfare. Every ounce matters. Every piece of gear must justify its presence. Anything non-essential becomes not just dead weight but a potential liability. The Kachin guide notices the Americans struggle without comment. This, too, is part of the learning process. The jungle will teach its lessons whether students are willing or not. Those who adapt quickly will survive. Those who don't, won't. Water becomes an obsession despite being everywhere. The streams look inviting, but Maung Tin's warnings are clear. Parasites, bacteria, and worse lurk in even the clearest-looking water. Every drop must be purified, every source treated with suspicion. The irony isn't lost. Surrounded by water, yet constantly thirsty. The vegetation itself tells stories for those who know how to read them. Certain plants indicate elevation changes ahead, others signal the presence of water. Some mark areas where the soil composition changes, affecting drainage and trafficability. The jungle is a library written in chlorophyll and bark, and the Kachin guides are its most accomplished scholars. As the day progresses, the initial anxiety of entering unknown territory begins to transform into something more complex. There's still wariness, still the constant alertness that combat zones demand. But there's also a growing appreciation for the intricate beauty of this environment. The way light filters through multiple layers of leaves, creating patterns that shift and dance with every breath of air. The incredible diversity of life, more species visible in a single day than exist in entire American states. Our Marauder begins to understand why the Japanese have been so effective in jungle warfare. This isn't an environment that can be conquered through conventional military thinking. It requires a different approach entirely, one that works with the jungle rather than against it. The Japanese learned this lesson early in their Pacific campaigns. Now the Americans must master it as well, or their mission will end before it truly begins. The afternoon brings new challenges. The humidity seems to intensify, if such a thing is possible. The weight of water-saturated air becomes almost tangible. Breathing requires conscious effort. The simple act of walking becomes an exercise in endurance that no training program could have fully prepared them for. Yet there's something oddly meditative about the rhythm of jungle travel. Step, pause, listen, observe, step again. The pace is deliberate, almost ceremonial. It forces a kind of mindfulness that peacetime life rarely demands. Every sense must remain engaged. Every moment requires full presence. The first day's march covers less distance than planned, but more ground than measured. The Marauders are learning to read the jungle's moods, to recognize its dangers, to appreciate its alien beauty. They're beginning their transformation from American soldiers into something new. Jungle fighters capable of matching the Japanese at their own game. As evening approaches and thoughts turn toward finding a suitable place to rest, our Marauder realizes that the jungle has already begun to change him. His breathing has adjusted to the thick air. His eyes have learned to penetrate the green shadows. His ears have begun to distinguish between the sounds that matter and those that don't. The real test, however, still lies ahead, in the green depths where Japanese forces wait, confident in their mastery of this domain. Whispers of the villages. The path ahead splits into 3 barely visible traces through the undergrowth. Our guide, a weathered Kachin man whose name sounds like flowing water when he speaks it, gestures toward the middle route with practiced economy. His movements carry the fluid certainty of someone who has walked these hills since childhood, long before Japanese boots ever pressed into Burmese soil. The trail climbs steadily now, winding between stands of teak and wild fig trees, whose roots have claimed ancient stone terraces. Evidence of cultivation, abandoned but not forgotten. The Marauder notices how the jungle here feels different, more purposeful somehow. Less wild chaos, more careful coexistence. Even the bird calls seem softer, more musical. Then, as if materializing from the green itself, the village appears. It sits in a natural clearing where a spring bubbles up from moss-covered rocks, creating a series of small pools that catch and reflect the filtered sunlight. Perhaps 30 structures in all, raised on stilts against the monsoon floods, their walls woven from split bamboo in patterns that speak of generations of refined technique. Smoke rises in thin, almost invisible columns from cooking fires carefully banked to produce minimal signature. The villagers emerge with the unhurried grace of people who have learned to read strangers at considerable distance. Children peer from behind their mothers' longyi, wide dark eyes taking in these mud-stained foreigners with their strange equipment and foreign faces. An elderly man, his back straight despite his years, approaches with hands pressed together in greeting. Our Marauder finds himself struck by the profound normalcy of it all. Here, hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, in terrain that maps in Washington mark as unsurveyed, people are living, simply living. A woman tends a small garden of vegetables he cannot name. Another weaves at a loom, her fingers moving in rhythms older than any war. Children play a game involving smooth stones and quick hands, their laughter carrying the universal sound of childhood joy. The village headman speaks quietly with their Kachin guide, words flowing in a language that seems to incorporate the sounds of the forest itself. Occasionally, both men glance toward the Marauders, not with suspicion exactly, but with the careful assessment of people who have survived by understanding exactly who passes through their world. What becomes clear, even without sharing language, is that these villagers know everything that moves through their valley. They know which paths the Japanese patrols favor. They know where the supply dumps are hidden. They know which streams run clear and which have been fouled by military camps upstream. This knowledge isn't gathered through any formal intelligence network. It's simply the accumulated awareness of people whose survival depends on understanding their environment completely. A young woman approaches, carrying a wooden bowl filled with what appears to be tea made from leaves our Marauder doesn't recognize. The liquid is pale green, almost golden, with a fragrance that speaks of mountain herbs and careful preparation. She offers it with a slight bow, her eyes meeting his briefly, with a directness that somehow manages to be both respectful and utterly fearless. The tea tastes of earth and sky, if such a thing were possible. There's a subtle bitterness that gives way to something almost sweet, and beneath it all, a quality that seems to settle the constant low-level tension that has become his normal state since entering the jungle. His shoulders, perpetually braced against unknown dangers, begin to relax slightly. The headman produces a piece of bark paper, its surface covered with marks that gradually resolve into a remarkably detailed map, not drawn to Western standards, but accurate in ways that matter more than precise scale. Here, a symbol indicating a stream that runs year-round. There, marks showing where the trail becomes impassable during heavy rains, and scattered throughout, small notations that their guide translates in whispered English. Japanese camp, maybe 40 men. Supply trail, used every 3 days. Bridge destroyed, must ford here. Intelligence gathered not through reconnaissance flights or radio intercepts, but through the patient observation of people whose lives intersect daily with the movements of armies. Children sent to collect medicinal plants return with reports of new tire tracks. Hunters tracking deer notice boot prints that don't belong to any villager. Women washing clothes at stream junctions observe which paths show fresh usage. As evening settles over the village, our marauder finds himself invited to share a meal. The food is simple but prepared with obvious care. Rice steamed in bamboo tubes that impart a subtle flavor. Vegetables that must have been gathered from the forest that morning. Small fish caught in the mountain streams. Everything seasoned with herbs and spices that create combinations entirely new to his palate. He watches the easy interactions between generations, the way decisions seem to emerge from quiet consultation rather than authoritative pronouncement. Children help with adult tasks not because they're forced to, but because participation in community life appears to be simply what children do. Elders are consulted not out of obligation, but because their knowledge is genuinely valued. The contrast with his own world feels profound. Where he comes from, expertise is specialized, compartmentalized. Here, knowledge seems to flow more organically. The same person who can identify which plants will treat dysentery also knows exactly how Japanese patrol schedules have changed over the past month. The woman who weaves those intricate bamboo walls also serves as the village's primary source of intelligence about enemy troop movements. As full darkness approaches, the headman brings out a collection of small packages wrapped in broad leaves. Inside, our marauder discovers are various preparations, powdered bark that their guide explains will help prevent jungle rot, dried leaves that can be brewed into tea for stomach ailments, a paste made from roots that serves as surprisingly effective insect repellent. Each remedy comes with careful instruction, demonstrated through gesture and translated through their guide's patient interpretation. How much to use, when to apply it, what signs to watch for that might indicate the need for different treatment. Knowledge accumulated over generations, refined through countless trials, now offered freely to these foreign soldiers whose mission they understand only in the broadest terms. But perhaps most valuable of all is what the headman shares about the Japanese forces in the region. Not just their numbers and positions, but their patterns, their weaknesses, their growing supply difficulties. How their patrols have become more predictable as they've settled into routine. How their officers have grown overconfident, relying too heavily on maps that don't reflect local conditions. How their communication lines have become stretched thin across terrain that swallows radio signals and makes courier routes treacherous. The villagers have noticed that Japanese foraging parties have been ranging farther from their bases, suggesting supply shortages. They've observed increased tension between Japanese officers and their Burmese auxiliaries, indicating growing strain in their coalition. They've tracked changes in patrol timing that suggest the enemy is struggling with the same navigation challenges that plague all outsiders in this terrain. All of this intelligence flows naturally from the simple fact of living here, of being part of the landscape rather than trying to impose control over it. The villagers don't think of themselves as spies or resistance fighters. They're simply people whose survival has always depended on understanding everything that happens in their world. As our marauder settles into the sleeping space provided, a raised platform covered with woven mats that somehow manage to be both firm and comfortable. He finds himself reflecting on the profound difference between conquering territory and belonging to it. The Japanese, for all their tactical skill and military efficiency, remain fundamentally alien to this environment. They move through it, camp in it, fight over it, but they don't truly inhabit it. These villages, by contrast, are part of the forest's own fabric. Their presence enhances rather than disrupts the natural order. Their knowledge grows organically from daily interaction with their environment rather than being imposed from outside. The sounds of the village settling into night create a symphony entirely different from either the urban noise of home or the wild cacophony of the deep jungle. Quiet conversations in musical voices. The soft sounds of final preparations for tomorrow. Children being settled into sleep with lullabies in a language that seems to incorporate the whisper of wind through bamboo. Lying there in the darkness, surrounded by the gentle sounds of a community at peace, despite the war raging around them, our marauder feels something he hasn't experienced since leaving the foothills. A sense of sanctuary. Not just physical safety, though the village's hidden location and the vigilance of its people certainly provide that, but something deeper, a reminder that human civilization, at its core, is about people caring for each other and for the place they call home. Tomorrow will bring a return to the trail, to the constant alertness and grinding uncertainty of movement through hostile territory. But tonight, in this pocket of peace carved from the wilderness by generations of patient human effort, he can rest with something approaching true tranquility. The spring bubbles softly in the darkness, its sound a constant gentle murmur that seems to wash away the accumulated tension of weeks in the field. Somewhere in the forest, a night bird calls. Not the harsh cry of a predator, but something melodic, almost conversational. Sleep comes easily here, in this place where the jungle and human habitation have found their perfect balance. The River of Trials. The morning comes gently, filtered through layers of green canopy that transform the harsh light into something soft and welcoming. But even as I savor these last moments of sanctuary, the weight of our mission presses against my consciousness like a physical thing. The intelligence gathered here has given us purpose, but it has also given us urgency. Our Kachin hosts move quietly through their morning routines, and I notice how they glance toward the eastern trails with expressions I've learned to read. The Japanese are moving too, somewhere out there in the vast green maze. Time, that most precious of military resources, slips through our fingers like water. Colonel Hunter's voice carries the weight of command as he briefs us on the route ahead. The maps, such as they are, show a river crossing 12 miles to the southeast, the Chindwin's tributary. A waterway that might as well be marked with the ancient cartographer's warning, "Here be dragons." But this dragon is real, and we must pass through its domain. The farewell with our Kachin friends is brief but profound. No elaborate ceremonies, just the quiet exchange of men who understand that survival often depends on the kindness of strangers. They press small gifts into our hands, carved tokens, packets of salt, knowledge whispered in broken English about the best crossing points downstream. As we file back into the jungle, I feel the village's peace slip away behind us like a half-remembered dream. The forest closes around us once more, but now it feels different, more urgent, more alive with possibility and threat. Every shadow could conceal a Japanese patrol. Every bird call might be a signal. The terrain begins to change as we move toward the river. The ground slopes downward in subtle increments, and the air grows heavier, more humid. You can smell water long before you see it in the jungle. That particular richness that speaks of flowing currents and river stones worn smooth by countless monsoons. The sound reaches us first, a low continuous murmur that gradually separates itself from the general symphony of jungle noise. Water, moving fast, moving with purpose. My stomach tightens involuntarily. Rivers in this country aren't the gentle streams of home. They're arteries of a living landscape, swollen with seasonal rains and unpredictable as the weather that feeds them. When we finally reach the bank, the sight stops us cold. The water runs dark and swift, perhaps 60 yards across at its narrowest point. The current moves with a muscular power that speaks of deep channels and hidden obstacles. Logs and debris sweep past at intervals, reminders of the river's strength and indifference to human ambition. Lieutenant Larson studies the crossing through his field glasses, his jaw working methodically on a piece of gum that's probably lost its flavor hours ago. Currents running about 6 knots, he murmurs to the colonel, maybe more in the center channel. Waters high, probably chest deep in the shallows, over our heads in the middle. I watch the surface patterns, reading the subtle signs that betray what lies beneath. That smooth patch downstream, likely a deep hole where the current has carved out the riverbed. The ripples and eddies near the far bank, submerged rocks or fallen trees waiting to trap an unwary crosser. The preparation takes on the methodical quality of ritual. Equipment is redistributed, waterproofed, secured with extra care. Ammunition goes into rubber bags. Radio components get wrapped in oiled cloth and canvas. Every man checks his neighbor's pack straps, his weapon sling, his bootlaces. In water like this, a loose piece of gear can become an anchor. We move upstream to where the catch-in guides indicated the best crossing point. Here, a series of large boulders breaks the current's force, creating a natural ford of sorts. But natural doesn't mean safe. The stones are slick with algae and river moss oars, and the gaps between them channel the water into accelerated flows that could sweep a man off his feet in an instant. The first rope team goes across with agonizing care. Sergeant Martinez takes point, his movements deliberate and calculated. Each step is a negotiation with the current, a careful placement of boot on stone. The rope pays out behind him, creating a lifeline for those who follow. Halfway across, he disappears. For a heart-stopping moment, there's only the empty space where he stood, the rope suddenly taut and angled downstream. Then his head breaks the surface 20 yards below the crossing point, his arm raised in the signal that means, I'm alive, but this is not going according to plan. The current has him, but his training holds. Instead of fighting the river's power directly, he works with it, angling toward the far shore while the water carries him downstream. It's like watching a man negotiate with the force of nature, and somehow winning. When he finally hauls himself onto the opposite bank, muddy and gasping but intact, the collective exhale from our side is audible even over the river's roar. He waves once, then begins the careful process of securing the rope to a sturdy tree. Now we have our lifeline. The crossing becomes a slow procession of controlled risk. Each man clips into the rope, then enters the water with the careful reverence of someone walking into a cathedral that could kill you if you show insufficient respect. The current hits like a physical blow, trying to sweep feet from under carefully placed steps. My turn comes with the fourth group. The water is shockingly cold, even in this tropical climate. It rises from ankles to knees to waist with frightening speed, and suddenly I understand why Martinez went under. The riverbed drops away like a cliff face, and the current that seemed manageable from the bank becomes an overwhelming force. My grip on the rope becomes everything. The manila fibers, rough and reassuring under my palms, represent the difference between crossing and drowning. Each hand-over-hand movement is a small victory against the water's relentless pressure. My boots slip on stones I cannot see, and more than once, only the rope keeps me upright. Halfway across, in the deepest part of the channel, something brushes against my leg. For a terrifying instant, my mind conjures images of river snakes or worse. But it's only a submerged branch, swept along by the same current that wants to claim me. Still, the reminder of the river's hidden dangers sends adrenaline coursing through already strained muscles. The far bank, when I finally reach it, feels like salvation, solid ground, blessed and immovable, beneath boots that have forgotten what stability means. I drag myself up the muddy slope and turn to watch the next group begin their crossing, understanding now why each successful transit draws quiet nods of acknowledgement from those already across. By late afternoon, all of Merrill's Marauders have conquered the river. Our equipment is intact, our personnel accounted for, our mission timeline still achievable, but the crossing has extracted its price in energy and nerve. We're all aware of how close we came to disaster, how easily this calculated risk could have become catastrophe. The sound of falling water draws us upstream from the crossing point. Around a bend in the river, we discover something unexpected. A waterfall, perhaps 15 feet high, where the stream tumbles over a ledge of black stone into a pool so clear you can count the pebbles on the bottom. The noise of falling water creates a natural sound barrier, masking our voices and movements from any listening ears. Here, Colonel Hunter calls for a rest halt. The decision is tactical. We need to dry equipment and restore energy levels before continuing. But it's also humane. The crossing has left us all slightly shaken, and this place offers something we desperately need: a moment of peace in a landscape that has been testing us without mercy. I find myself sitting on a smooth boulder beside the pool, watching the water cascade down in sheets of liquid crystal. The late afternoon light catches in the spray, creating brief rainbows that appear and vanish like thoughts. For the first time in days, the sound of water brings comfort rather than anxiety. My thoughts drift homeward, pulled by the hypnotic rhythm of falling water. Home. What does that word mean now? Is it the small town in Ohio where I learned to fish in streams that never tried to kill me? Is it the training camps where we forged ourselves into something harder than civilians, but not yet as hard as veterans? Or has home become something more portable, the shared understanding between men who have crossed rivers together? The faces of the men around me have become as familiar as family. More than familiar. We know each other in ways that families never do. We've seen each other afraid, exhausted, pushed beyond normal limits. We've shared the peculiar intimacy of men who trust each other with their lives on a daily basis. Will we all see home again? The question hangs unspoken in the mist above the waterfall. Statistics suggest that some of us won't. The mathematics of warfare are unforgiving in their honesty. But here, in this moment of unexpected beauty, such calculations seem irrelevant. We are alive. We are together. We have crossed the river. The waterfall continues its ancient song, indifferent to human concerns, but somehow comforting in its permanence. Long after we've passed through this landscape, long after this war has become history, water will still fall over these stones into this pool. There's something deeply reassuring about that continuity, something that makes our small human struggles feel both significant and properly proportioned. As evening approaches, we prepare to move out. Equipment is repacked, weapons checked, the eternal rituals of soldiers in the field. But something has changed during our rest beside the waterfall. The river crossing, which could have broken us, has instead made us stronger. We've faced the landscape's challenge and emerged intact. The jungle ahead holds new trials, new tests of our resolve and capability. But we carry with us now the knowledge that we can cross rivers, both the literal waterways that bar our path and the metaphorical streams of doubt and fear that could drown us if we let them. The sound of falling water fades behind us as we move deeper into the green cathedral of the forest, but its music lingers in memory. A reminder that even in war, even in the most hostile environments, beauty persists. And campfire dreams. The afternoon light filters through the canopy in golden shafts as we establish our temporary camp in a small clearing, perhaps 50 yards across, surrounded by towering teak trees whose massive trunks disappear into the green maze above. This is our sanctuary for the next 18 hours, a brief respite in our long journey toward objectives that exist only as coordinates on maps and whispered intelligence reports. Sergeant Morrison directs the placement of our perimeter with the quiet efficiency that has kept us alive through 3 weeks of jungle warfare. No shouting, no unnecessary movement, just hand signals and the kind of understanding that develops between men who have learned to read each other's thoughts in the spaces between heartbeats. The Kachin guides fade into the forest like shadows, establishing their own watchposts in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. I help Private Chen clear a space for our small fire, carefully removing the damp leaves and creating a ring of stones that will contain our flames without creating a beacon for enemy observers. The art of the jungle fire is something we learned through trial and error. How to select the driest wood from seemingly sodden forest. How to build a flame that gives warmth and light without betraying our position to Japanese patrols that might be moving through the darkness. As evening approaches, the jungle begins its nightly transformation. The oppressive heat of the day slowly gives way to something more tolerable. Not cool by any measure, but bearable. The sounds change too. The harsh cries of tropical birds yielding to the softer chorus of insects, and the distant calls of creatures we cannot name but have learned to recognize as part of this alien symphony. Chen strikes a match and touches it to the carefully arranged tinder. dry bamboo shavings and strips of bark that catch quickly despite the humidity that seems to penetrate everything in this green world. The flame grows slowly, feeding on progressively larger pieces of wood until we have a modest fire that pushes back the gathering darkness and creates a circle of warmth that feels like civilization itself. The other men gather around our small beacon, faces emerging from the twilight like figures from a half-remembered dream. There's Kowalski from Chicago, whose hands can strip and reassemble a bar faster than most men can load a single clip. Thompson from rural Georgia, who reads the jungle's moods like a farmer reading weather. Rodriguez from New Mexico, whose Spanish sometimes slips into his English when he's tired, creating a linguistic music that reminds us all of home. "Anyone got stories?" Morrison asks quietly, settling onto a fallen log that serves as our communal bench. His voice carries the easy authority of a man who has learned to lead without dominating, to guide without breaking the fragile bonds of trust that hold small units together in hostile territory. Thompson grins and produces a battered deck of cards from his pack, the edges worn soft from handling, the faces marked with the stains of countless games played in foxholes and barracks and jungle clearings just like this one. How about some poker instead? Nothing serious, just something to keep our hands busy while we wait for tomorrow. The cards are dealt with practiced efficiency. 5-card stud, nothing wild, stakes limited to the kind of IOUs that will be forgotten by morning. But the real game is not in the cards themselves. It's in the quiet conversation that flows around the table like water around stones in a stream. Kowalski tells us about his neighborhood back in Chicago, the corner grocery store where his father works 16-hour days, the elevated train that rattles past his bedroom window every morning at 6:15, the girl named Marie who promised to wait for him, but whose letters have grown shorter and less frequent with each passing month. His voice carries no bitterness, just the gentle melancholy of a man learning to hold memories lightly. Rodriguez shares stories of the New Mexico desert, landscapes so different from this jungle that they might as well be descriptions of another planet. He speaks of sunsets that paint the sky in colors we have not seen since entering this green cathedral, of silence so profound that you can hear your own heartbeat, of horizons that stretch unbroken to the edge of the world. Thompson's tales are quieter, small moments from a Georgia farm where his family has worked the same red earth for 3 generations. He describes the sound of rain on a tin roof during summer thunderstorms, the taste of well water drawn from depths that have never known sunlight, the satisfaction of work that connects a man directly to the soil that feeds him. I find myself sharing fragments of my own past, carefully selected memories that feel safe to expose in this circle of firelight. The smell of my mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings, the sound of church bells across the small town where I grew up, the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder the day I left for basic training. But we do not speak of fear. We do not discuss the intelligence reports that suggest heavy Japanese concentrations ahead of us, the knowledge that our mission will likely take us into direct contact with enemy forces who know this terrain better than we ever will. We do not mention the men we have already lost, the empty spaces in our formation that remind us daily of our own mortality. Instead, we focus on the immediate, the warmth of the fire against our faces, the surprisingly good taste of K-rations heated over open flames, the simple pleasure of dry socks after days of perpetual dampness. These small comforts become precious in ways that civilian life never taught us to appreciate. Chen produces a harmonica from his pack, a small instrument that somehow survived the river crossing and the countless miles of jungle trekking. He plays softly, melodies that drift through the clearing like smoke from our fire. Some songs we recognize, fragments of popular tunes that remind us of radio broadcasts and dance halls and Saturday night movies. Others are his own creation, improvisations that seem to capture something essential about this place and this moment. The music mingles with the jungle's evening chorus, creating a soundtrack that belongs neither to civilization nor to pure wilderness, but to something in between. We are learning to exist in these liminal spaces, between war and peace, between fear and courage, between the men we were and the men we are becoming. As full darkness settles over our clearing, the fire becomes our universe. Beyond its circle of light lies mystery, the vast complexity of a jungle that conceals both beauty and danger in equal measure. But within this small ring of warmth, we have created something approaching home. Morrison checks his watch and announces the guard rotation, 2-hour shifts that will carry us through until dawn. The men, not on first watch, begin the familiar ritual of preparing for sleep, checking weapons, adjusting packs, finding the least uncomfortable positions on ground that seems designed to defeat human comfort. I draw the second watch, the quiet hours after midnight when the jungle settles into its deepest rhythms. For now I can simply rest. Not sleep exactly, but the kind of relaxed alertness that passes for rest in combat zones. My back against a tree trunk, my rifle across my knees, my eyes following the dance of flames that will burn low but not die completely. The conversations grow quieter as exhaustion claims voices that have carried us through another day. Chen's harmonica fades to whispers, gentle melodies that seem designed more for personal comfort than public performance. The card game dissolves as hands become too tired to hold the worn pasteboard steady. One by one, my companions settle into whatever approximation of sleep this place allows. Their breathing grows deeper, more regular, though I notice that even in rest, they maintain the alertness that has become second nature. A man learns to sleep with one ear always listening, one part of his mind always monitoring the sounds that might signal danger. The fire settles into its own rhythm, the soft crackle of burning wood, the occasional pop of sap encountering flame, the gentle hiss of moisture being driven from still damp timber. These sounds become a kind of meditation, a focus point for thoughts that might otherwise scatter into worry about tomorrow's challenges. I think about the training that brought us to this moment, the countless hours of preparation that seemed so abstract in the camps of India, but now reveal themselves as essential knowledge. The lessons in jungle survival, the practice in small unit tactics, the endless repetition of procedures that must become instinctive when there is no time for conscious thought. But more than technique, I think about the bonds that have formed between us. Connections forged not through shared interests or common backgrounds, but through the simple act of facing danger together. We have become something more than the sum of our individual selves, a small organism capable of survival in conditions that would defeat any of us alone. The jungle around us settles into its nighttime personality, different from the oppressive weight of the daylight hours, but no less alive. Somewhere in the darkness, creatures move through their ancient routines, hunting and hiding, feeding and breeding, following patterns established long before humans ever set foot in this green world. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, river crossings or enemy contact, or simply the grinding exhaustion of another day's march through terrain that seems designed to test human endurance. But for now, in this small circle of firelight, we have achieved something approaching peace. The flames dance lower now, settling toward the steady glow of coals that will provide warmth through the night without requiring constant attention. My watch shows 11:30, half an hour before I must wake Thompson for his turn at guard duty. Half an hour to simply exist in this moment, to appreciate the simple fact of being alive in a world that offers beauty even in its most dangerous places. The fire whispers its ancient song, the same music that has comforted human beings since the first flames pushed back the first darkness. In this sound, I find something approaching home. And homeward bound, the fire whispers its ancient song, the same music that has comforted human beings since the first flames pushed back the first darkness. In this sound, I find something approaching home. But even as I settle into this moment of peace, I know it cannot last forever. The mission that brought us here, the objectives that General Stilwell outlined in those careful briefings, they still await us somewhere beyond the next ridge. Yet tonight, in this small circle of warmth and brotherhood, those distant goals seem less urgent than the simple act of being present with these men who have become my family. Thompson shifts in his sleep, muttering something about his sister's apple pie. Chen's harmonica catches the firelight, still warm from the music that filled our evening. Rodriguez has folded his letters carefully and tucked them inside his jacket, close to his heart. These small details, these human touches, they matter more than any tactical manual ever taught us. I think about the letters I should write, the words I should find to explain what we have discovered here in this green wilderness. How do you describe the weight of monsoon air to someone who has never felt it press against their skin? How do you capture the particular quality of light that filters through a triple canopy? That green-gold luminescence that transforms the jungle into something almost sacred. My mother will want to know if I am eating enough, if I am staying warm and dry. She cannot imagine that warmth here comes not from wool blankets, but from the shared breath of men sleeping close together. That dryness is a luxury we abandoned weeks ago, replaced by something more valuable: the knowledge that we can endure whatever this land demands of us. The fire settles lower now, individual flames giving way to the steady glow of coals. In an hour, Thompson will wake and add fresh wood, maintaining this small beacon that marks our presence in the vast darkness. By morning, we will scatter these embers and move on, leaving no trace except perhaps a slight depression in the earth where we rested. This is the nature of our mission, to pass through without permanence, to accomplish our objectives and fade back into the jungle like ghosts. But the places we have been, the people we have met, they will carry forward some memory of our passage. The Kachin villagers who shared their knowledge and their sanctuary, they will remember the American soldiers who treated them with respect, who understood that this land belonged to them in ways no map could ever capture. I wonder what stories they will tell about us, these brief visitors who appeared from the jungle and disappeared back into it. Will they remember Rodriguez teaching their children to play cards? Will they speak of Chen's music, those haunting melodies that needed no translation? Or will we become simply another chapter in the long history of strangers who passed through their hidden valley? The thought brings a strange comfort, to be remembered not as conquerors or liberators, but simply as human beings who shared a moment of connection across the vast distances of culture and language. This seems like a worthy legacy, perhaps more valuable than any military objective we might accomplish. My watch shows midnight now. Time to wake Thompson, to pass the responsibility of watchfulness to fresh eyes and steady hands. But I find myself reluctant to disturb this perfect stillness, this moment suspended between the dangers we have faced and those yet to come. In the distance, I hear the soft call of a nightbird, one of those mysterious voices that populate the jungle's darkness. Earlier in our mission, such sounds would have triggered immediate alertness, hands moving instinctively to weapons, eyes scanning for threats. Now I recognize it as simply another resident of this vast green world, no more dangerous than the cricket chorus or the whisper of wind through bamboo. This change in perception, this gradual acceptance of the jungle's rhythms, perhaps this is what we were really meant to learn here. Not just the tactical skills of deep penetration warfare, not just the techniques of survival in hostile terrain, but something deeper about adaptation, about finding our place in environments that initially seem impossible to navigate. Thompson stirs as I touch his shoulder, instantly alert despite the gentle awakening. This too has become second nature, the ability to transition immediately from sleep to full awareness. He nods silently as I point to my watch, understanding without need for words. In a few hours he will wake Rodriguez, who will wake Chen, who will wake me again as dawn approaches. This rhythm of shared responsibility, this unspoken trust that each man will fulfill his duty, it represents something profound about human cooperation under pressure. We have learned to function as a single organism, each individual contributing his strengths while the group compensates for individual weaknesses. I settle into my bedroll, feeling the familiar embrace of damp earth and humid air. Above me, the canopy filters starlight into scattered points of silver, a ceiling of leaves that has become as familiar as any bedroom I ever knew. The sounds of the jungle, once alien and threatening, now form a lullaby that carries me toward sleep. But even as exhaustion claims my body, my mind continues to process the experiences of these past weeks. The faces of villagers who welcomed us despite every reason for suspicion, the moment when Rodriguez nearly disappeared beneath the river's surface, the taste of rice shared around a fire built from wood, gathered by many hands. These memories settle into permanent places in my consciousness. I think about the letters that will eventually reach families back home, the official reports that will reduce our experiences to tactical summaries and casualty figures. How inadequate such documents will be, How impossible to capture the real substance of what we have learned about ourselves and each other in this green laboratory of human endurance. The war will end someday, though from this vantage point in the jungle darkness, that conclusion seems as distant as the stars above the canopy. When it does, when we return to the familiar landscapes of home, what will we carry with us from this experience? How will we translate the lessons of the jungle into the language of ordinary life? Perhaps the most valuable discovery has been the recognition that home is not just a place, but a quality of connection that can be created anywhere human beings choose to care for each other. This small fire, this circle of sleeping soldiers, this temporary sanctuary carved from hostile wilderness, it possesses all the essential elements of home: safety, warmth, shared purpose, mutual trust. The fire burns lower now, individual coals pulsing like slow heartbeats in the darkness. Thompson sits quietly at the edge of our perimeter, alert but relaxed, guardian of our small community. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new terrain to navigate, new tests of our skills and resolve. But tonight, in this moment of perfect stillness, we have found something worth protecting, something worth carrying forward into whatever future awaits us. I close my eyes and let the jungle's night music wash over me, the symphony of insects and nightbirds, the whisper of wind through leaves, the soft breathing of men who trust each other enough to sleep peacefully in the heart of enemy territory. These sounds weave together into something approaching prayer, gratitude for this moment of peace, hope for the dawn that will eventually come, faith in the bonds that hold us together against whatever darkness we must face. And in that space between waking and sleeping, between the known and the unknown, between the war we are fighting and the peace we are seeking, I find myself thinking of all the small fires burning tonight across this vast theater of conflict, each one representing a group of human beings who have chosen to care for each other despite the enormous forces arrayed against such simple acts of love. And in this thought, in this recognition of our shared humanity burning bright against the darkness, I discover something that feels very much like the true meaning of home. Not a place on any map, but a quality of connection that transcends geography and circumstance, a warmth that no enemy can extinguish, a light that will guide us through whatever wilderness lies ahead, until we find our way back to the people and places we have carried in our hearts through all these long nights in the jungle, back to the embrace of those who have waited for our return, back to the simple miracle of being alive and together in a world that offers beauty even in its most dangerous places.